Hey everyone, I'm going to try to make this video as quick as possible. I'll show you how to work around 3 issues with the Pro BFG controller on PC, the main one being 0% dead zones. So for the first section, we'll resolve that using Steam input, and for the second section of this video, I'll show you how to use Steam input in all your games, not just the ones on Steam. And for the third section, there'll be a workaround for this driver error that a lot of people have, and I'll use VirtualBox to show you how to get around that. So before I get started, I just want to point out that this might only be for the PlayStation version of the controller, not the Xbox version. And that's only because there's a toggle at the top of the controller where you can swap between PC, PS4, and PS5 modes. So right now the controller's in PC mode, and I just want to show off my Apex sensitivity settings. You can see my dead zone and response curve are all set to 0. So theoretically there should be some amount of cursor drift happening here, but there just isn't. The crosshair is still. But you can fix that with Steam input if you just open up your Steam overlay and go down to controller settings and you just enable Steam input. Once you enable it, you just want to make sure that your template is set to Gamepad, so there's no extra macros or binds set for your buttons. And you want to go to edit layout, joysticks, and then click this cogwheel here. And you just want to make sure that your dead zone is set to No Deadzone. This is kind of a set it and forget it type of thing. You don't have to do this for every game you launch. Once Steam input is enabled, that's just it. So once Steam input is on, you can go ahead and swap your controller over to PS4 or PS5 mode. It'll take a second to reconnect. Once it does, you can just return back to your game, and you can see now that the controller is drifting a little bit, but that just means that there's now no dead zone, so you're free to customize your aim the way you like it. Makes micro adjustments a lot easier. So this does work in all Steam games, not just Apex obviously. Once you enable Steam input and set all your settings up and make sure your controller's in PS4 or PS5 mode, you can just leave it as is. Every time you open up a Steam game, it'll launch with these settings with the 0% dead zone, and you should just be good to go from there. So for this second section, we're going to be using a software called GlosSI, GLOSSI. It just means global Steam input. And basically what it'll do is allow Steam to open up a dummy game. And the only purpose of it is for it to launch a Steam input controller on your computer itself. And that way every game on your computer, or any program for that matter, can see the controller itself. Unfortunately, the project is dead. But based on the nature of the way it works, it should continue to work for the foreseeable future. But it also does mean that the website to download the software is gone. So the only way to find it is to either compile this yourself, which I will include a tutorial for that in the description. But there are multiple re-uploads of the installer floating around the internet. I'll link a saved one or just upload it myself and include that in the description as well. But for now, I'll just move on to the downloaded file because I already have that. So once you have the file, it should be this one, this GlosSI installer 0.1.2.0. It's a pretty straightforward installer. Just hit next. You can read most of it if you want to. These are all features that make the program work. It doesn't include any adware or anything, so you should feel free to just click next over and over. Once you have it, you can run it, just make sure it works. Shows this. You don't really need this, to be honest. So for now, I'll just open up Call of Duty. This is from the Xbox Game Pass store. So by default, it doesn't work with this controller. I can just show that off now. The controller's in PS5 mode, and I'll just skip ahead to show the controller's not working. Now that we have Call of Duty open, being that this isn't a Steam game, I got it off the Xbox app for PC. So this goes for any other launcher than Steam basically. The controller's in PS5 mode, and since it doesn't show up as a normal PlayStation controller, you can clearly see that no button I hit works. We can fix this with GlosSI, so I'll just return back to Steam and show you how to get this to work in any game on your computer. So there are a few settings I'd recommend you change in GlosSI before you get started, just to make it less annoying to use. If you just go over to these settings, you can copy mine as is, but I would rather open it as a separate window and just have these enabled as well. You also want to make absolutely sure that you set your max overlay FPS to 5. Otherwise, the overlay will actually run at unlimited frame rate, which could actually hurt your FPS in the game that you're trying to play. With 5, the difference is basically 0%. But once you have that enabled, you just want to save it. and go into your Steam games library and add a non-Steam game. You want to go ahead and browse, and if you go into your program files and then in GlosSI, you'll see a file in here called GlosSI target. You want to add that to be added to this list. You can add to selected program, find it in your library, and then just run it. Once you run it, it'll show up in this little window right here. You'll get a few settings. You can basically just leave everything as default or play with it as you see fit. But essentially all it's doing is hiding your actual controller and emulating an Xbox 360 controller for all of your games to see. You can select to enable a PS4 controller instead, but I kind of feel like compatibility for that's kind of spotty in most games. But once you run the program, you can just return it back to Call of Duty, and now you can see that the controller is working perfectly fine, and you'll have that 0 dead zone. So for this last part, we'll be using VirtualBox to create a virtual machine within our computer, basically just running another computer within a computer. It's a lot less complicated than it actually sounds, but we'll use that to connect our controller to that, and that'll resolve this issue that I and a lot of other people have been experiencing where you try to open up this program to set your binds and whatever, and this happens. It's really annoying. I used to be able to fix it in the past, but it doesn't really work anymore. I tried the, compatibility registry thing that they offer on the website. Try running it. Allow it. Restart the program. And basically the exact same thing happens. It's no real surprise. Basically, to get started, you'll just go to VirtualBox's website and download it and install it there. I feel like at this point you probably know how to install a program, so I'll just kind of fly through this. Once it's installed, you can just go ahead and start it. And to complete that, you'll need the Windows 11 or Windows 10 ISO to install Windows to your virtual machine. You can get that directly from Microsoft's website for free. You just go here and select your language, and you'll be given a download link. So once that's finished and you open up VirtualBox, you can add a new virtual machine just by hitting New. You can name this literally whatever you want to. Leave the folder as default, and the ISO image, you want to select that Windows 11 image that you downloaded earlier, or Windows 10. It's really up to you. You can select from any of these versions if you want. It doesn't really matter for what we're doing. The unattended install, you can change this password. I'm just going to set this password because, again, it really doesn't matter. We're only using this virtual machine for one thing. The only thing that you really want to change here is the product key. Since it can't proceed without a product key, you can just get a generic product key from GitHub. It's not a valid Windows 11 license, but it at least lets you go through the whole installation process, or well, VirtualBox will actually do that for you. So you just copy the key for the version you selected into this section right here, you hit finish, and it'll just launch automatically and start the Windows 11 installation process. Once you get here, just hit any key to boot. And again, by default, this installation process is actually automatic by VirtualBox. You can kind of just sit back and let it do its thing. You can speed this up a bit. I left my settings by default, which just give the virtual machine 2 cores from the CPU and 4 gigs of RAM. It's kind of low spec, but again, we're not really using this for much other than our controller. So once Windows is installed, the first thing you want to do is right-click your VM in the manager here and go into its settings. Go into network, and you want to change the attached to bridge adapter, because without this, your VM won't have internet. This just lets it share the same internet that your actual computer is using. So once this has internet, we'll just wait for it to turn to Ethernet sign. Great, you can just open up the Windows Store. Okay, now that the store is updated, you can just search for the Victrix software here. and install it as normal as if it was another computer. Once it's installed, you want to connect your controller to the virtual machine. You can just do that by having it connected to your computer as normal. Go to devices up here, USB, and it'll be this performance design products, whatever. Click it, it'll connect it to the VM instead of your computer. You can open up the software as normal and it should just work. You can do the same thing for your controller as well as the wireless adapter itself. And you can see I can go into here, set all my analog stick dead zones, paddles, etc. And once you set this up, you don't have to go through all this again. You can just close the VM, and when you need to return to it, you can just open up the manager, run the VM again, and it'll all be here. I hope this does help everybody. I agree that it's pretty stupid that we have to do any of this to get the controller to work the way we want to, but it is what it is at this point. I feel like the controller itself is fine, just the software is terrible. There's a section for the dead zone here, but it's not 0% no matter what you do. There's workarounds for all of this, but we definitely shouldn't have to. I feel like most of this is straightforward. It should just work, but if you have any issues, just shoot me a message in the comments and maybe I'll be able to help out. But until then,